That night still haunts me, even though I've since moved to the other side of the country. I'm 14 now, but I was 13 when it happened, and it's a memory I can't shake. We lived in a nice neighborhood, the kind where you never expect anything bad to happen. A quiet, peaceful place where I felt safe, until that night. It was around 11:30 p.m., and I was getting ready for bed. I hadn't encountered anyone on my way home or noticed anything strange. Everything seemed normal. Our German shepherd, Bella, who was only 1 at the time and full of energy, followed me into my room. I trusted her completely. She was always by my side, and though still young, she had already become protective. After changing into my pajamas, I crawled into bed, my eyes automatically going to my closet. Ever since I watched Insidious, or however you pronounce it, I've been terrified of leaving my closet door open at night. Every night since then, I've made sure to close it before I go to sleep, and that night was no different. I closed the door and turned off the lights. Bella lay down next to my bed, but something was off. Her ears were perked up, and she kept staring at the door, alert but not growling, just watching. It sent a chill through me, but I tried to brush it off. I just wanted to fall asleep and forget about the weird feeling in my gut. I finally drifted off, but it didn't last. I woke up to the low, guttural sound of Bella growling, her body tense, her eyes locked on my closet door. A cold wave of fear washed over me, and I felt the blood drain from my face. She never growled like that unless something was wrong, really wrong. I wanted to scream, wanted to jump out of bed and run, but my body wouldn't move. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and my mind was racing with fear. Then, the closet door creaked. It's one of those push-in types, the kind that anyone could open from the outside with barely a sound. My breath caught in my throat, and that's when I saw it. A face. Half of a face. Pale skin, hollow eyes, peeking out from behind the closet door. I've never been more terrified in my life. I wanted to believe I was imagining it, that I was still caught in some half-dream, but Bella's growling turned into furious, feral barking. She lunged at the closet just as I let out the loudest, most gut-wrenching scream I'd ever heard. It wasn't just fear, it was pure terror, a scream that felt like it came from somewhere deep inside me, a place I didn't even know existed. I heard the heavy thud of my dad's footsteps charging down the hall. Bella was already on the intruder, her jaws clamped around his arm, and the man was struggling, trying to push her off, but she wasn't letting go. My dad burst into the room, hunting shotgun in hand, his face set with fury. He didn't hesitate. "Bella, release!" he shouted, and she immediately obeyed, dropping the man's arm but staying alert, ready to attack again. My dad, who's big, strong, and trained in combat, grabbed the man by the neck and dragged him out of my room. I watched in shock, still frozen, as my dad manhandled the intruder like he was nothing, pulling him through the house toward the front door. I followed, my legs shaky, hearing my family's shocked screams as they realized what was happening. Outside, under the porch light, my dad wrestled the man to the ground. He pinned him down with ease and demanded that I hand him the toy handcuffs I'd had since I was a kid. I scrambled to find them, my hands shaking as I handed them over. My mom was on the phone with the police, her voice trembling with fear and anger. We waited for what felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 10 minutes before the police arrived. When they did, they wasted no time securing the intruder in proper handcuffs and pulling him to his feet. But just as they were about to load him into the back of the squad car, he turned and looked at me. I'll never forget that look. His face was twisted with this unnatural, unsettling grin, his eyes wide with something I can only describe as insanity. It was a look that pierced through me, that made my blood run cold and my knees weak. There was something so raw, so evil in his gaze that it felt like he was reaching into my soul, trying to leave a mark. And he did. I didn't sleep for nights after that. Even now, just thinking about it, I can feel that same wave of terror creeping over me. We moved away not long after. My parents didn't want to take any chances, and to be honest, I didn't either. We packed up and left that house behind, but the fear didn't stay there. It followed me. I went to therapy, trying to shake the memory, trying to make sense of why that man was in my closet, why he was watching me. The police never told us much about him, only that he was known to have broken into other homes in the area, but they couldn't explain why he had chosen ours, why he had chosen my room. I try not to think about it too much, but sometimes it creeps up on me, especially at night, when the house is quiet and I'm lying in bed, staring at the closet door. Even though I'm in a different house now, a different city entirely, the fear is still there, lurking in the back of my mind. And I still wonder, sometimes, what if Bella hadn't been there? What if I hadn't woken up? What if my dad hadn't reached me in time? It's those questions that haunt me the most. It was about 2 years ago, but the memory of that day still sticks with me, even if the details are a bit hazy. My friend Harrison lived out in the rural parts, which was pretty different for me since I had spent most of my life in the city. That summer, we spent what felt like weeks exploring his mom's ranch and the surrounding area. It was new territory for me, but Harrison seemed to know every inch of those fields, woods, and old buildings like the back of his hand. One day, Harrison's mom took us on a trip to a friend's farm a few miles out. While she got caught up in conversation with her friends, Harrison and I decided to go exploring, like we always did. We wandered off without much of a plan, just curious to see what was around. The landscape was rough, fields covered in nettles, and long, unkempt grass as far as the eye could see. After a while, we stumbled upon something that instantly piqued our interest. It was an old, small factory, the kind of place that looked like it had been abandoned for years. It was surrounded by a sea of overgrown weeds and nettles. The windows were either smashed in or boarded up, and there was a kicked-down door that looked like an open invitation. The building practically screamed, "Don't go inside!" But of course, being teenagers, that's exactly what we did. The first room we entered was a large garage area, and the smell hit us immediately. It was foul, like something rotting or decaying. The air was thick with it. I could feel the back of my throat gagging from the stench. The walls were stained and cracked, and the whole place had this eerie, forgotten atmosphere about it. We moved deeper into the factory, curious to see more. In the next room, we found hundreds of small concrete squares, each about a meter by a meter. At first, we couldn't figure out what they were for, but later, after doing some research, I learned that the place used to be a maggot factory. The squares were where they would keep the maggots. Just knowing that was enough to creep me out, but it wasn't until we got to the last room that things really went downhill. This room was different. It had 2 smaller rooms attached, each with a large wooden door. The smell in there was almost unbearable, but what caught my eye was in the corner of the room. There was a small, old radio, smashed to pieces, and right next to it was an axe. The radio's shattered remains were scattered across the floor, like someone had taken their anger out on it. The sight of it made my stomach churn. It felt wrong, like we shouldn't be there. I turned to call Harrison over. "Hey man, you gotta see this." But there was no reply. I called for him again. "Harrison?" Nothing. I started to feel that prickling sensation of fear creep up my spine. He was gone. I hadn't heard him leave, hadn't seen him move. He was just gone. I looked at the 2 wooden doors. One of them suddenly slammed shut with a loud bang. My heart leaped into my throat. I ran up to the door, banging on it. "Harrison, are you in there? Stop messing around, man." No answer. I waited, pressing my ear against the door, trying to hear anything, breathing, Footsteps? Something? But the room was dead silent. The fear bubbling up inside me was too much. I panicked. I bolted from the factory, sprinting outside, my lungs burning and my heart racing. When I got outside, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, standing by the road, was Harrison. He was out of breath, his face pale. "I saw someone in there," he said between gasps. "I don't know who it was, but they were watching me." I ran. I felt my blood run cold. I hadn't seen anyone, but the slamming door, the broken radio, the axe. It all added up to something I couldn't explain. We left that place without saying another word, just eager to get as far away from it as possible. For 2 years we never talked about it. It was one of those memories you bury deep down, because the less you think about it, the less real it feels. But last month, something happened that brought it all rushing back. Harrison and I decided to go back. We were older, maybe a bit braver, and we wanted to see if the place was still there. Maybe it wasn't as creepy as we remembered, but when we got there, something was different. The once abandoned factory now had CCTV cameras installed around the property. A local worker stopped us as we were about to approach the building. "Don't go in there," he said, his tone flat but serious. "People have been living in that place." Harrison and I exchanged uneasy glances. People had been living there. The thought made my stomach turn. The worker didn't give us any more details, but we didn't need them. We knew something was off about that factory, about that day 2 years ago. Whoever had been living there, whether it was back then or now, clearly didn't want visitors. As we drove away, the memories from that summer came flooding back. Harrison disappearing, the slamming door, the person he saw. I still don't know who was in that factory with us that day, or what their intentions were. But every now and then, I think about what could have happened if I hadn't run when I did. The truth is, some places, no matter how curious we are better left alone. Halloween last year was supposed to be like any other, just me and a couple of buddies out collecting candy, joking around, and trying to hit every house we could. Our neighborhood's not the best, but it's not the worst either. It's somewhere in the middle, with a mix of decent houses and some sketchy spots. Still, we'd never had any real trouble before, so none of us thought much of it when we headed out that night. We'd been out for about an hour and a half when we came to this house at the end of the street. It was kind of isolated, with no other houses close by, which already made it stand out. What caught our attention, though, was the sign taped to the door. It said, "Go to the van for your candy," with an arrow pointing down the street, back the way we'd come. Sure enough, we turned around, and there it was. A black van parked a little ways off, just sitting there. It gave me this uneasy feeling right away. The house being at the end of the street made it feel like the perfect setup for a quick getaway if something went wrong. But we were trying to be brave. After all, it was Halloween, and people do weird stuff, right? Maybe it was just a strange prank or some over-the-top way to hand out candy. We walked over to the van, trying to act casual, but I could tell the others were feeling the same way I was. The closer we got, the more my instincts were screaming at me that something was seriously wrong. A man sat in the driver's seat wearing a baseball cap low over his face, watching us approach. He didn't smile, didn't say much at first, just waited until we were right there by the van. Then, in this flat, almost bored voice, he said, "Your candy's in the back. Just open up the door and get in so you can grab some." Alarms went off in my head. Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around and run. I glanced at my friends, and they were giving me the same wide-eyed look, like, "What the hell is this?" I tried to play it cool and asked him, "Why isn't the door already open? And why are you out here in a van? Couldn't you just leave a bowl out like everyone else?" The man didn't answer for a second, just sat there staring at us through the rearview mirror. Then he repeated, "Get in the back and grab your candy." That was it. I wasn't about to stick around and find out what happened next. Something about the way he spoke, how little he seemed to care, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I shook my head and motioned to my friends to leave. "Nah, we're good," I said, and we all turned and started walking away. It didn't feel like enough, though. As we walked, we kept glancing over our shoulders, half expecting the guy to step out of the van and come after us. But he didn't. He just sat there, watching us leave. About 20 minutes later, we were a few blocks away, still talking about how weird the whole thing had been, when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Halfway down the street behind us, creeping along slowly, was the same black van. I didn't even have to say anything. The others noticed it too, and we all knew immediately what was going on. "That's the same van," I whispered, my voice tight with fear. My friends' faces went pale, and we quickly agreed. We had to run. Without saying another word, we bolted. We ran faster than I think any of us ever had in our lives, feet pounding the pavement, hearts racing. The van must have seen us running because it sped up too, just for a second. But then it veered off and turned down another street, heading in the opposite direction. That scared me even more, like the driver didn't want to be too obvious about following us, but still wanted to keep us in sight. We didn't stop running until we reached one of my friends' houses. Breathless and terrified, we burst through the door and told his parents what had happened. They freaked out, immediately grabbing the phone to call the police. They were yelling, demanding that someone come out and find the van, find the guy who had tried to lure us in. The police came by that night, but by then, the van was long gone. We described everything. The sign, the man, the way he'd told us to get in the back of the van. But I don't know if they ever found him. They promised to patrol the area more, but honestly, it felt like too little, too late. Whoever he was gone by then. After that, we made a pact. No more trick-or-treating. It wasn't worth the risk. I don't know what would have happened if one of us had actually gotten into that van, but I have a pretty good idea. The thought of it still makes me shudder. How close we came to something that could have gone so wrong. It's been a year now, and we still talk about it sometimes, usually when Halloween comes up. None of us will go near a van if we see one parked alone at night. I still wonder if that guy has tried it again, in another neighborhood, with some other group of kids. But one thing's for sure, I'm never letting my guard down like that again.